This is the story of the time I smelled a ghost in Portland, Oregon. It was February 20, 2015. It was a Friday and it was the weekend of my 23rd birthday. So we were in Portland, we meaning me and my boyfriend at the time. We were in Portland, Oregon. We were living in LA at the time. We ended up in Portland though because he had surprised me with tickets for my birthday. Once I got there, I remembered that this was the city with the Shanghai tunnels. I am a huge history nerd. Like, if I go travel anywhere, or like anytime I am anywhere, even when I'm at home in Jamaica, I love knowing the history of a place. I want to know the story of a place. If it comes down to going out to a bar or visiting some kind of iconic landmark, like historical landmark, I am choosing the historical landmark. When I got to Portland, I had looked up the most highly rated tour of the Shanghai tunnels, and I got 2 tickets for that night. So at 7:30 p.m. we met this group at an iconic historical bar. Didn't have to choose between the bar or the historical site. It was one and the same. And it was like a decent group of people, maybe like 15. But we met at this old landmark bar on the Willamette River. I don't remember the name of the bar. It was this guide and his assistant, and we started in the main room of this bar. And when the tour started, he took us down to the basement, and it kind of looked like we were going into the storeroom until you realize that it turned into like an underground tunnel situation, and that was the beginning of the Shanghai tunnels. Not in general, but just like for this tour. Some context. The Shanghai tunnels were or are this network of tunnels in Portland, Oregon, and they were built by mainly Chinese labor, and they were built to transport illegal goods and services throughout the 20th century and into the 19th century as well. Because they were underground, they were unregulated. Basically anything could happen there, and drunken men in bars were the prime target of the people operating the Shanghai tunnels. The Shanghai tunnels served as this feeder to ships and ship captains looking for labor. So what would end up happening is they would cut holes in the floors of bars like the one that we went to, and drunk men would stumble onto the exact square that they had cut out, and they would pull it right as they were drunk enough to not realize what was going on, and they would fall into the tunnel, and they would just never be seen again by anyone above ground. And that is how they got like trapped into slave labor on these ships for the rest of their lives. We went into the basement of this bar, and we could see, looking up, that there was like this trap door where people would fall down. So the tunnels themselves are like a decent size. Over the years they've gotten blocked, and they've had to like excavate the area so that you could even walk in them. They were big enough for a group of 15 to 17 people to walk around and not like feel sardined in there. I will say though, like, it was pretty claustrophobic because the ceilings were now low, and it was just like they weren't fully excavated, so it was just like very, like, it just didn't feel good, you know. But the 15 of us were walking around no problem, and the guide and the assistant would take us to different areas in the Shanghai tunnels. Like, it wasn't that much ground that we covered, but we were walking in like a decent amount of space. Then we finally come to this little area where there were alcoves carved out, and they had set up a bed with a lamp post with a little red light on it. That little area was indicative of where there used to be a brothel in the Shanghai tunnels. Of course, in the 19th and 20th centuries, where there was slave labor, there was also sex work. Many women who ended up working in sex work in the Shanghai tunnels were captured in much the same way that the men were, where they were like, they fell into a trapdoor basically. So our guide was telling us about, I'm on a hill, I'm walking up a hill telling a story. Our guide was telling us about this one particular prostitute. I don't remember her name, but I do remember she was the lady in red. So this alcove and this little like brothel setup that we were seeing, that was her particular bed. That's where she worked specifically. Throughout this tour, I would walk with the group for the most part, but I would always take a minute to like hang behind and like feel out the space for myself, because you know, I see ghosts and stuff, and I want to experience things in my own way. Like I want to experience things unfiltered and by myself to see if anything else had come through, as opposed to like when I was with the group. So when I had come in front of this alcove, I took a minute and I was just standing there, and like all of a sudden I get this huge whiff of like floral perfume. And at first I was like, I'm smelling one of the women in this tour with me, because it was like really strong. It felt as if somebody had taken perfume and sprayed it immediately in front of my nose, and that is what I was smelling. So I looked around, and you know, just confirming that like I was alone, I stepped away from everybody else, and I was not near anyone else. I was looking at this thing alone. So there was no one around me. So I wasn't smelling anyone. So like it kind of freaked me out, but I didn't think too much of it. But I did spend the rest of the tour like walking relatively close to the other women in the group, trying to smell them. That sounds creepy. And it was, but it was because I was trying to figure out what did I smell? I don't know. At the end of the tour, I went up to my boyfriend, who was like, you know, he wasn't thrilled. This is not his thing. He doesn't like ghosts. He doesn't believe anything that he can't like see. Really does not do well with any of the things that I am intimately involved with, which is the whole unseen world. But at the end of the tour, I went up to him and I was like, hey, did you smell like really strong perfume at at the little brothel area? And he's like, no. I ended up going to the tour guide and I was like, I don't know if this is a thing, but like, did you guys have like a little machine that you like spray so that people can smell anything down there? Like, are there scents of any kind down there? He's like, no. Like, what's the deal? I'm like, well, when I was down there, I smelled something like flowers. And he's like, what kind of flowers? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I want to say like orange blossoms or like something like that, you know? He crosses his arm and he's like, every tour there is at least one person who smells her. And I'm like, sir? I looked back at him and I was like kind of in shock, but also kind of not, because this was the time when I was like accepting more that I had these experiences quite frequently. And I was like, yeah, it makes sense. Those were flowers. And I was like, well, what do most people report smelling? And he's like, roses. Looking back, and like as soon as he said that, I felt like kind of stupid, because roses are like one of the most easily identifiable scents, and roses are like my favorite flower. I mean, at the time they were not, but it seems crazy that there was a point in time when I could not identify the scent of a rose. But anyway, so me and my then boyfriend walk out of this tour. I am giddy. He's completely freaked out because he He hates that I can do this and that this is a thing that happens to me regularly, and I am just jazzed. Even though I was like kind of afraid, I was kind of like just shaken up at the time, and I was kind of like trying to rationalize it away and find logical excuses for it. I did know that that was what was happening. I did know that I was smelling something that other people probably could not smell, and I did know somewhere in me that I was experiencing a spirit of sorts. So it was a very special time for me, because that was, I think, one of the first times I was consciously experiencing this extrasensory perceptive gift that I have. Although I was a little bit shaken up, it was great. So every time I think back to that story, I get absolutely just electrified. I get goosebumps. But I also smile every time. And me and that boyfriend broke up 6 months later. It was for the best, honestly.